Welcome to the webinar. Today we'll be covering how to build APIs in Node.js and Swagger using Apogee 127. As always, these presentations get posted to YouTube in a few days. We'll put the slides up on SlideShare. I'm Marsh Gardner. You can find me at Earth2Marsh on Twitter, and I'll be talking to you today with Jeff West, who's also on Twitter, Jeffrey A. West. We'll make sure that we have enough content. We have a lot to get through today, but there'll be time for questions at the end, so do post questions. I can already see one has come in asking whether the presentation will be available for download. Yes, I hope I answered that already. So you feel free to ask questions during. We'll try to get to them as we can, and definitely we have time at the end for all of that. Today will involve both some slides, but also more importantly some demos. We will see code. With that, the agenda, I will turn it over to Jeff, who is going to walk us through most of the rest of this, and I'll talk to you about Swagger in a bit.
Cool. So my name is Jeff West. I'm the product manager for a product that we have called Apogee 127. And what I want to do is share some of the context of why we built 127, for who it's targeted for, and then give you a demo of it. So in general, Apogee 127 and this webcast are for API developers and designers who are building new APIs. Whether they're interested in Node.js or not, it's definitely worth taking a look at both Swagger and Apogee 127 if you're building new APIs. We are also interested in creating a product and delivering a great experience for Node.js developers interested in APIs and building new APIs, or have existing APIs that they want to integrate with Swagger. And you don't have to be a Node expert to use Apogee 127. So we want to address a pretty broad skill set range with Node.js. From people just starting out to experts. And then anybody who is interested in learning about Swagger 2.0 and some of the cool things you can do with it. And that's who we're after.
So we already have one question in, which is, why do you call it Apogee 127?
Why do you call it Apogee 127? If you're watching the YouTube video, I have a red shirt that says there's no place like 127.0.0.1. What is 127.0.0.1?
That's my home.
It's my home.
It's localhost.
Yes, it's a local host. So the idea behind 127 is that we want to provide a great development environment for building APIs on your laptop. So you don't have to log into a cloud IDE, and we'll show you the tools that we give you to make that possible.
And actually, that's a big departure for Apogee products in general, right? Usually, when you want to build a policy that runs on Apogee Edge, you have to deploy that to the cloud before you get to see it and test it in action. But with Apogee 127, you have the ability to develop things locally, and this is a big change.
Yes. So first, let's talk about JavaScript's, kind of conceptually in APIs. So we have a great cloud platform for people who are interested in building API proxies. And the language that we provide on our cloud platform is XML. So our policies are written in XML and configured in XML. And we've had a lot of success with that. It's very flexible. It's very useful. But some of our customers...
I hear enterprises love XML.
Yes, enterprises, of course, love XML. However, when you start talking to developers about, hey, we're going to build new APIs, and you say, here's what you use, and it is XML, some developers might be inclined to share politely, XML is not a programming language. I write programs, not XML. So...
you talk to a lot more polite developers than I do, but yes. Good.
Yes, I would say it might politely say, or otherwise I'm not going to do that. So we have heard feedback that programmers want to program, and we want to give them tools to be able for them to do that and program with the Apogee platform. So if not XML, what would we do? What makes sense to use? Well, JavaScript is a perfect fit because there's many things to that. There's many reasons to go with JavaScript. For starters, people are already using JavaScript on our platform, and JavaScript in general is very popular for APIs. So when we did a study of our platform, we found that 67% of developers actually use JavaScript right now in their API proxies. And 30% of the developers on our platform use Node.js. So we already have people using JavaScript. So enhancing that and giving, it seems like a natural fit. And another reason why it's a natural fit is we want to empower developers to deliver great experiences through APIs. Typically what is consuming that experience is a web app that has a lot of JavaScript in it. And when you have JavaScript that you can use to design and develop and deliver the APIs to enable those experiences, you can develop those two things side by side without changing languages, which makes it very efficient for building web apps that are powered by APIs.
I mean, that's in some ways it's the story of why Node is so popular, right? It's because
Yes.
JavaScript is the lingua franca of the web, and so since both front end and now back end engineers are writing things in JavaScript, that's a pretty common language for people to build from.
Yes. And so another, we've had conversations with enterprise customers who, think Node.js is a trend, it's a new thing, I can't control it, therefore I don't want it in my environment, which is valid. It's understandable.
They used to say that about APIs too, by the
They
way.
used to say that about APIs, and they used to say that about Java, and they used to say that about many other things that are now kind of the de facto standard for many different things. So, I thought it was important to share some of the, and these are not necessarily Apigee customers. These are people, these logos you see here are consumers and users of Node.js who have publicly stated and endorsed Node.js for what they are doing. So if you Google, for example, Walmart in Node.js, you'll find lots of stuff about Walmart in Node.js. These are not necessarily our customers, although some of them are. So what do we see here? We see that Node.js is popular with people like the New York Times and Walmart, who are what we would call digital immigrants, because they didn't start out, the internet kind of came after them, right? Versus somebody like Medium or LinkedIn, the internet, they wouldn't have their business if the internet didn't exist. So we would call those digital natives. So it's popular with both of those groups and both of those segments. So now I'm going to turn it over to Marsh to talk about Swagger 2 and what we've done with Swagger.
Cool, great. So back in May, we announced that we were going to start embracing Swagger more. We were really excited about that. A lot has happened since then. Just to talk about Swagger for a second and why we're big fans. These are all stats that come from Reverb, which is the company that grew out of WordNik, which is where Swagger originated. They built it for themselves to solve their own problems as an API-driven company. They're definitely in the digital native category, and they've had to date, just to give a sense of how big the community is, they have 10,000 production instances today using Swagger. That they're seeing 2,000 downloads a day of the Java framework. That they estimate about 10,000 or more developers that are using it, and that includes thousands of contributions because this is all an open source project. It's not driven by any vendor. It's very open, and I think that's part of the reason for its success. And then what's really interesting is that there was a working group announced, and there were nearly 1,000. There were certainly over 900 people who applied to be in the working group. That ended up at the group of over 500 people. It's a pretty good-sized working group. And that was all about taking this very successful word-of-mouth project that we've begun seeing all over the place in the enterprise and updating it 3.5 years, 4 years later for a world that's changed a lot. There are reasons why it took us so long to embrace Swagger to the degree we have at Apigee. Mostly those were because the description format of the first version was certainly much less descriptive than 2.0 is. So before Swagger came out, the state of the art was really WADL. And as we touched on earlier, XML is not really the greatest way to describe an API that's a JSON-based API. And so while there are nice things with XML, you get lots of validation tools and such, and WADL was a very descriptive description language for APIs. Really what we needed to see was sort of all of the things that we had learned about the ways in which what makes description language successful, and figure out how to update the Swagger format to be able to capture that. So there were a few things that we set out to do as a working group. One, for instance, Swagger had been very strong in this bottom-up approach where you can use code annotations, much like you used to with WSDL and with WADL. Use code annotations to describe your services. They're self-describing. That's great if you already have existing code. It's not a great thing if you want to begin by figuring out what your API specification is first, and then generate your code from that.
So why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just? Why wouldn't you just?
Well, that's a good
why wouldn't
question.
you just start writing code?
Yeah, well, I found that whenever that happens in projects that I'm on, we end up with an API that looks like crap, right? And so really APIs, there's an art to designing APIs, and the moment you start having APIs in production, they become a lot harder to change.
Yes.
And so just like any great software project, you need to spend some time on the design side figuring out how people are going to use it. And APIs are an interface. That's the I API, right? So they are an interface, and if you haven't been very thoughtful and careful about designing those interfaces, you're going to end up with a bad API. So maybe you version it later. I think there's a much better way, and I think the industry has matured a bit, and we're starting to see a lot more of this design, API design practice happening before people start writing code. So it was great to have bottom-up in Swagger. We also wanted to have a more human-friendly format, because when you're writing, JSON's definitely machine first and people second. You have to remember to you've got match quotes, you've got to match your braces. You have to look maybe hundreds of lines down to find where that block ends, right?
Yeah.
YAML is really, every line is self-contained. It's much more human-friendly. I think YAML is more people first and machine second. And so it turns out to be a really nice way in which to imagine a new API. And Jeff will be showing a bit about that in a bit. Some other great things about Swagger 2, just like Swagger 1, it's programming language agnostic. It's got broad support in lots of languages, much community participation around that. It can be used to, part of the Swagger history is that it's very good at generating both server and client code. So you can now take an API specification written in the Swagger format and generate server-side code. You can always, as long as I can remember Swagger at least, I believe even before it was released as an open source project, it was able to generate SDKs. So SDKs have been built into there from the beginning. One of the big things that prevented us from adopting Swagger at Apogee for a long time was that it had no extensibility. There's lots of metadata that wants to be organized around the structure of an API, and if the format doesn't support that kind of extension, then what are you going to do with it? So when we first launched our API consoles, for instance, Waddle didn't have an authentication attribute, but we were able to extend Waddle because it was written in XML. We needed that kind of ability to be able to add in all kinds of things that we needed to be able to associate with the structure of an API. You'll see some of that again in a demo. That's a teaser for the demo. And then one of the things that I thought was really amazing was the amount of cross-industry participation, and I had no idea how deep Swagger had infiltrated enterprise. Just some of the names of people who represented companies in the working group. We were there, all right. These are in alphabetical order, we just happen to be A. Getty Images, Intuit, Kaplan, Living Social, McKesson, Microsoft, Morningstar, PayPal. I mean, it was a pretty impressive group of people that were making meaningful contributions to moving the spec forward.
The other thing I thought was interesting is we had, obviously, on paper, I'm a product guy, we're product guys, but we also had people who were developers and consumers and also technical writers and documentation experts, or that's their business or that's their job at some or one of these companies. They were participating in this. So not only was it cross-industry participation, but also cross-function, where we have developers, documentation, product guys. So it really was a diverse group.
That's a very good point. So Swagger 2 and the working group also marked the first time where we began contributing code, which is a big step, right? And so one of the things that was going to make the authoring format successful is that's, and I mean the YAML syntax for Swagger specification. Without having good tooling for generating that spec, you sort of there's nowhere to go, right? And so in order to help jumpstart the community, we did a proof of concept, which was received very well, and then we've grown it up. So now if you go to, I think today it's at editor.swagger.wordnik.com. That's probably moving to swagger.io shortly. But this is contributed by us. We're starting to see a lot of contributions and pull requests and issues being filed. People are really using it, and that's great to see. And this is going to be successful because the community embraces it and uses it, and we're already seeing that happen. And you're going to actually see this in a few minutes when we get to Apogee 127, and with that, I will turn it back over to you.
I think Apogee 127 is a great product, not because I'm paid to say that, because I actually do like it and I enjoy using it, and it's really cool. So what I want to do is make sure that, I want to touch on some of the content that we have here and walk you through what it is, but I'd rather spend more time actually, showing you the product itself. So Apogee 127 is available now. It has been for about a month now, in more of a final state. We've been working on it for several months. It's open source. You can see our progress. We've done it completely out in the open. You can install it using npm. If you one note, if you don't have your npm environment set up, or depending on how you have it set up, you may need to use sudo to actually do the installation using npm. As Marsh mentioned, one of the things that we can do from the Swagger specification is generate an actual server process that serves up the API according to the specification. And when we do that, with the addition of Apogee, with the addition of vendor extensions in Swagger 2.0, we can use extensions built by Apogee in this document to dynamically, when we start a server process, figure out how we want to manage the API. What you can do with Apogee 127 is you can develop enterprise APIs really fast. And we have a few different libraries that help to accomplish this. We have the Swagger tools, which is something that we built as we were working contributing to the Swagger 2.0 spec. We are using Node.js to do that, where basically what that component does is it takes the spec and it validates the paths and the incoming parameters against the spec. So if it says something is required and it's not found, then it will spit it back from that level. We also have some Node.js policies, which are open source, available through our Volos library, that extend this by adding caching, quota, and analytics, and we'll show all of these. So when we take care of all of those things, as an API developer, all you have to do is write the business logic for your API, which is, and then we take care of caching, authorization, validation of messages, such that you don't have to worry about those things. And we do it according to the spec. So when the spec changes, it will accordingly make the changes to the API implementation itself. So what we have with Apogee 127, when you install it, what you get is the Swagger editor that Marsh mentioned earlier, and I'll show you that. The Swagger tools, some of our Volos libraries and middleware that wires that up. And also I'll show you how easy it is to use UserGrid with Apogee 127 and the tooling that we have as well. And for those of you who don't know, UserGrid is our open source contribution for a backend as a service. It's on Apache. It's in an incubating stage right now, and once we get to the 1.0 stage, then it will become a full-fledged Apache project.
In short, it's like a turnkey graph API.
Yes.
Built on top of a NoSQL database.
Yes. And then this is the version, if you use Apogee BAS, we have some additional features on top of UserGrid, but this is at the core of what we have in our backend as a service product. So with that, what I'll do is I'll switch over to share my screen, and then we'll take a look at the product itself. I do see one question that somebody had a problem installing it. You want to make sure that you have Node NPM version 1.3 or higher. If you have 1.2 or older, it may tell you that the package doesn't exist or that there's a problem with the package. So it might be an issue with the version of NPM you're using. So let's get right to it. So what I'll do is, for those of you who are following along, there's some steps documented, and I'll pull it up for reference so you can see it. So if you go into Apogee 127 on GitHub and A127 documentation, you'll see a link to the wiki. And then under installation, it'll tell you about how you can get it installed. And there's two options. One, as I mentioned, is you might need to use sudo, and then in which case you'll need to use unsafe permissions. It's not unsafe to you necessarily, it's just letting you know that it's going to create a file in your root folder, which is .a127, and this is where we store configuration stuff. We don't touch anything. Nonetheless, you should kind of be wary when you have to use sudo to install something. Understandably, I am as well. So what you can do, there's some steps to configure your NPM or Node.js environment here for NPM configuration for Mac and Linux. And here are the steps to kind of do that. So what I'll do is here, I'll do npm set prefix. npm, and what this does is it creates a .npm-rc file, and it sets the prefix. So when I do, and then I have it added to my path already. So then when I do npm install -g globally, because there's an executable that we have here, apogee-127, depending on the version of npm that you have, or the subversion of npm you have, you may see a lot of output, or you may see a little spinning indicator here. But ultimately, what you should see is something that looks like this, indicating that it is complete. Let me resize my window real quick. Okay, let's stick with that. All right, so when you do this, you get something called A127, which is a command line client. And what you do with this is it allows you to create a project, deploy your project to different places, and manage the life cycle of the configuration, everything to do with your product. So that's kind of the way that you interact with Apogee 127. So I have a projects directory. I'm going to go ahead and remove the webcast example that I had before. And the way you get started with Apogee 127 to create a project is you do A127 project create. We'll call this webcast 2. And what this does is it creates the scaffolding for our new project. And what we wanted to do was make it easy to get started with it. So when you do project create, you have a working project out of the box. So when I go into webcast 2, I can do A127 project start. And what this does is, of course, everyone's favorite hello world.
Where Scott where world equals Scott.
Yes. Scott Gagnon, one of our Rockstar developers. So when we do this here, I do hello world, hello, pass the name of Scott, and if I don't pass a name, I'll say hello stranger. So now what I want to do is show you the Swagger editor. So I do A127 project edit. When you do this, it will pop up a window with your default browser and allow you to start editing the YAML and see a representation of your documentation on the right. So here, just I want to show you, kind of point out a couple things. First, I'm going to change this required parameter to true. So now, if name is not specified, the behavior should change. Just to orient you with the YAML, it has stuff like the version and title, different schemes like HTTP, HTTPS, whether you consume JSON or XML and produce JSON or XML. We'll talk about some of the extensions later. If you see here, x-something, that implies a vendor extension. Then we get to the path section. So here, I have /hello, which is defining a path, and then I'm specifying a controller, and this is where the simple JavaScript logic exists for this controller. Then we have a get method with an operation ID of hello. Then you specify parameters, and then responses as well. With parameters, you can do query parameters, you can do path parameters, you can do body parameters, and we allow you to specify the schema for those things as well. So the incoming messages can get validated against the spec before they hit your code, so you don't have to worry about that. So let me show you, just for reference, I changed name to be required. So now, restart the API, and now when I do hello, it'll tell me name is required. So it's important to note that what we've done here is we're taking the spec when you start the API, or when you start the node process, and we're wiring up all the middleware in the back end. What we're not doing is taking the spec, generating static files that then get used as part of your API. So why would we do that? One reason is because then and this is going back to the WSDL days, if you change the WSDL, or the WSDL changes, you have to regenerate your clients and then compile them and include them in your library and then go on and do that. So there's two representations of the API. We want one representation of the API, and that's what we've done here. So one of the other things that we can do is very easily deploy APIs that are built with 127 to Apogee. And the way we do this first is to create an account.
Do I have to deploy these to Apogee?
You don't. You can deploy them to, as we see here, the providers that are listed are Amazon. So we enable you to, so basically we spit out a zip file that makes it easy to push it to Elastic Beanstalk. We're currently working on Heroku, so when you deploy your project, we'll make it very easy to deploy and work with Heroku, of course Apogee, and also to push it to a different place on a local machine, for example. So if you don't have an account, so if you answer no to this question, it'll pop up a window and present you with the sign-up form. We don't do this. This is a manual thing because you have to validate your email address. Otherwise, we could have 10,000 people, using our APIs to create, 10,000 each. Then we have so many users that it's not great. So so you can create an account. I already have an account, so I don't have to create it. Here, you can specify the URI. So what does this mean? We wanted to make this available not only to our cloud customers, but also the customers who are running Apogee on-prem. So if you're running on-prem, you would have a different URI, right? So you'd have a host name or an IP address that was different. This is for our cloud instance, which is the default. Then, one of the Apogee configuration constructs is an organization. This is the container for the API proxies and the APIs that you have created on Apogee. Specify my username and password. In this case, we'll be using a test environment. Virtual hosts imply default is HTTP, secure is HTTPS. I'll take both. And when you do that, right now what it's doing is deploying something that we call the Apogee remote proxy. So what this enables me to do is A127 project deploy. So I'll kick that off in a minute, and I'll tell you a little bit about the Apogee remote proxy. When you deploy something on Apogee, we give you services like OAuth, quota, caching, and analytics. And those are valuable services that we offer on our platform. However, there's some of those things that make sense to expose to people to consume remotely. For example, OAuth. We enable people to use OAuth, our OAuth server, in their API. And we have libraries that are inside the API that communicate with the server-side process. Server-side process is the Apogee remote proxy. And I'll give you a demo of that, and it'll probably make a little bit more sense at that time. So basically, we'll do curl here, hello. What I would expect, yes, name is required, and then I do name equals Marsh. Hello, Marsh.
Hi.
So, and this is something that, so very quickly with a few commands, you can create an API, get it started, deploy to Apogee, deploy to somewhere else, and then start to iterate very quickly on your API, the implementation of it, the design of it, and keep those two things in sync as you do that.
Now, what if I want to change the logic, the controller for what's giving that response?
Great question. So, let's see, let me open up, I'll do this in Sublime so we can see what a project looks like. So this is the project that just got created when I did project create. So you'll see there's an API folder, and under here there's a Swagger, that's with the YAML, same YAML file that we had in the editor. We also have the ability to do a mock mode, either a forced mock or an implicit mock, that we can talk a little bit about.
Could I edit that YAML here in Sublime?
Absolutely.
Make changes?
Sure.
Great.
You can use whatever editor you want. Right? So I think our editor is at a good place right now. We're adding things like Code Complete. You saw some of those earlier. It's a great experience. But one of the things that we realize is, and why we have 127, is developers like to use the tools that they want to use, not the Apogee IDE for editing XML proxy, right? It's thank you. I'm sure you did a great job. It's beautiful. I still like to use my own things. I would prefer to edit this in IntelliJ, right? So I've used it for years. I love it.
But when you're not familiar with the Swagger syntax, being able to see the Swagger documentation generated on the right-hand side in real time is a really nice way to learn how to write Swagger specs.
Yes. And if you make mistakes, we've try to make the experience good. So if you, and I'll share some
Because
examples.
you're going to make mistakes.
Because you're going to make mistakes. Once you get the hang of YAML, just like anything else, it's very straightforward. But coming into it new, if things aren't lined up right, then you need help figuring it out. So to answer your question, there's a controllers directory, and the controller is where the actual business logic of your API is. So for this example, all that we have here is one function that says hello. So we pull the parameters out, the name parameter out, and then we return a message that says hello, and that's about it. So you'll see here that there's no validation logic here, there's no caching, there's no anything here. All of that stuff would be added declaratively through the Swagger specification, the vendor extensions. So let's take a look at one of the more complex examples, or a more complex example. What I'm going to be showing here is, we'll go back to GitHub. We have Apogee 127 and 127 samples. So these samples, I checked it out this morning, so I know it's working, and that we'll be seeing the same thing here. If you want to check these out and follow along, you can do that. I'll be showing the Weather Advanced example, and then I'll be walking through basically kind of this stuff here and showing you how it works. So if you want to follow along, you can do that. So same thing, same project layout, 27 project edit. Now let's take a closer look at some of the things in the editor. I also want to orient you to a couple of different things here. In the top right, there's an Apogee logo, and there's a drop down here where we provide you links to the wiki that we saw earlier, some examples of the Swagger annotations, and a link to submit an issue. This is an open source project, so we have a community support, which means basically right now, but we're evaluating this. Right now, we're not offering a paid support contract. So if you need support from us or from the community as more people adopt this, GitHub is the place to go. So if you're having a problem, open a ticket on GitHub, and we'll do our best to address it. Also in the top right, we have the Swagger logo with links to documentation about how to use YAML and what the syntax is, and also about Swagger. So one thing I wanted to note here, as I make changes, on the left side, the right side will be re-rendered. So you'll see, as I typed hello everyone on the left side of the source, that it updates the documentation on the right. You'll also see at the top, there's something here where it's highlighted that the changes have been saved. And as you make changes, it'll say working, and then if you make an error like this, what we would expect to see is that it knows that I screwed up and handles it accordingly. So let me see if I can break something here and give you an example. Error. So here, basically what I did is I added some text, and we'll see instead of saying that it was saved successfully and all changes were saved, then in the top left, it says that there's an error, and on the right hand side it tells me what the error is and why, where it might be. So let me tell you a little bit more about this one. This spec has a few different things that you didn't see in the other one. We'll talk about the 127 configuration here that has the proxy key and URI. Basically, this is what enables the 127 API to interact with Apogee. Here, we'll have Volos resources, and these are effectively the policies that go apply to different things. So we have a spike arrest policy, analytics policy, cache, quota, and OAuth that have their respective configuration items.
Can you explain again what Volos is in this case?
Absolutely. Last year, when we started our endeavor with Node.js, we created a set of value-added features and policies and a framework for building APIs the Apogee way that had things like caching and quota and OAuth that you could consume in any Node.js application. Has nothing to do, at that time, Apogee 127 didn't exist. So you could use these libraries in your Node.js APIs to take advantage of these things. So Volos is the open source library that encompasses all of those different policies. So then, if you look at the YAML here in the different paths, you'll see that I'll just collapse these real quick to show you another feature of the editor. That as I'm collapsing these, it's collapsing them on the right-hand side too. So if you want to focus on one specific area, or let's say you've scrolled off screen and you want to click to go to a specific path based on the documentation, we do that. So we go right to left and left to right, and these things are synchronized, which is pretty cool. So here, what I have is so on weather, just /weather, and I'll show you an example of how this works real quick. We have a analytics policy and then a spike arrest. And this spike arrest is configured to use the client IP of the client that's making the request. So enough babbling about configuration. Let's see it actually work. So what I'll do is I'll start this. And then when you start this, you'll have some example URLs that you can hit. I just really need this. So when I hit the proxy directly, and this has a spike arrest, what it's doing is you'll notice that I'm making a request here on my local host, port 110 or 10,010 rather. And let's take a look at this controller real quick. This is the same controller that exists for all of the different endpoints. All that I'm doing is basically taking the city parameter and passing it, proxying it to the OpenWeatherMap API. That's it, very simple logic. So when I do this, I can keep hitting it, and then I change spike arrest, and what our spike arrest policy actually does is it maintains a queue and then it kind of smooths it out. So spike arrest helps offload your backend systems, which is really nice. So if we go back to the configuration here for spike arrest, we see that it allows 10 per minute and it smooths it out for that. And then we have the helper here that's the client IP address. Let's take a look actually at the cache call here. So basically, I'll go back here, and we'll see that it's cached for 10 seconds, I believe. And so as I keep hitting it, it's returning, but every time that it's hitting the API in the back end, it's printing out a statement. So if I wait 10 seconds or a little bit longer, try to hit it again, it'll display it, so it's implying that it's being returned from the cache. So this is somewhat interesting, but I think one of the coolest things about it, and there's quota is kind of interesting, we'll see what that looks like. So it says 2 per minute, so on the third one, it's going to give me an error. We can see here that it says quota exceeded. And I think the screen may be refreshing a little bit slower, so I'll try to talk slower. So that's the quota thing. But one of the coolest things that we have, I think, is using OAuth. So I'm going to make a request against my local instance here, and I'm going to send in an OAuth token, and it's actually going to be validated against Apigee. And so what I'll do is I'll pull up what we have. I'll pull up Apigee console, and then we have the Apigee remote proxy. Go into, expand this a little bit. I'm going to start a trace session, and we specify the production environment. So click Start Trace, and then move this over. I'm going to make a request using a token against my local machine. And we can see with the trace session, this will show the incoming API calls to Apigee and to this remote proxy. And these, the token is being validated against Apigee. So each one here, we can see that there is a corresponding call into the Apigee remote proxy. And if we take a look here about what that's doing, it's verifying an access token. So I'm making a request against an API that's not running on Apigee with a token, and then the libraries are validating that token against Apigee. So if I use a token that was invalid, then it wouldn't work. And so that's kind of cool. You can also, let me grab the, okay, so you can also issue tokens as well. So here, this is the example request for issuing a token. And if we look here on the left, we see in this case, here it will be generate access token. And this is happening in real time. So that's pretty cool. One other thing I wanted to show you before we go through this is analytics as a service. And so somebody asked recently, what is analytics as a service? We only do analytics on our platform. Well, that used to be true, and this is something new. So basically what we can do is, as I'm hitting the API, and it's a slave to the Open Weather Map API, so if it's not going fast, and we might not even know it. So what we have here is, as I'm hitting those calls, basically it's sending analytics data into Apigee. And here we can see this is the payload, and we can see the number of accepted was 1. So it's sending 1 record at a time. Let's make it a little more interesting. So analytics. So use the analytics debug flag.
So we're going through a lot at a pretty fast pace.
Yes.
Like we said, we'll post a video of this so you can slow it down and replay stuff. Yes. But also all of this is mostly captured in the READMEs that come along with the sample weather project. Correct?
Yes. All the stuff that I'm doing here is in the sample project. And so what I'm doing now is I'm just running a script, and then we can kind of let that go in the background. And then I'll show you one more feature, which is the analytics that have come in. And I'm using a custom report, but you don't have to. And what I'll do is I'll take the last 5 minutes, and we can see that this is a graph of the analytics for the remote weather proxy that's running on my laptop. But I'm using the Apigee console.
That's cool.
to see the analytics. And then we can see the corresponding calls into the Apigee remote proxy. Right. So basically what you could do is you could build an API with 127, deploy it anywhere. Deploy it to Azure, deploy it to Heroku, deploy it in your own data center, run it on your laptop or a Raspberry Pi or a BeagleBone, which I've done, and you can report those analytics back to Apigee for the requests that get hit that API is serving up. So that's one of the cool features. It's a new thing from Apigee, and you'll be seeing it in I think several other manifestations as well.
So a couple questions are coming in. One was, can you use the YAML file just to define your proxy and documentation, but not generate controller or app code?
Sure.
The documentation part's the easy bit.
Yeah, documentation is the easy part. Many people do that.
But to define your proxy in this case, I assume this is from an Apigee perspective. That's something we're definitely looking at.
Yes, we're looking at that.
It's step one was to tie together Swagger and Apigee 127, a better way to build APIs. But this is definitely something that we're looking at for the future.
So let's do the Q&A at the end. So we.
Could you still have a couple things? Sorry, go ahead.
Yes.
We'll go back to that.
So we talked about this. So Volus is the open source library. It's a service provider interface. So we have a set of services and providers. We do caching in memory. You can do caching with Redis, or use Apigee, as I was showing with kind of the OAuth piece.
And these are the kinds of things you need in order to build and launch.
And that's why we did it, right? We wanted to provide libraries for API developers using Node.js. So kind of as I was showing you, just to give you a graphical representation, you can deploy Apigee 127 anywhere. It's an open source project. There's no license associated with it. We do aim to provide support for it someday soon, but not right now. As I was showing, you can also run it anywhere and then consume services from Apigee. So as we saw, the analytics service and OAuth. And then one of the great things about building it with this approach is you can be running it anywhere and then decide you want to put it on Apigee, use the same code without changing it, and consume the same types of services from Apigee on the Apigee platform. And we can say that for another webcast. So why would you deploy it on Apigee? We've solved a lot of problems related to hosting APIs. Distributed caching, distributed quota, distributed OAuth, these are not easy problems to solve. And having them be highly available as well, right? So you can run Apigee 127 anywhere, but if you want to use those types of services, you have to build them yourself, which is not an easy thing to do.
So Apigee 127 exists because we think the world needs a better way to build APIs, and and we think Node's a pretty awesome way to do that. but it's also, we love it. We like to make it easy for you to run them on Apogee, but really, first and foremost, this is about building APIs a better way.
Yes, building APIs, you can run them anywhere. Anywhere that supports Node.js, which we do. And so we'll work to support you. So we did go through stuff pretty fast today. And there's a bit of a lag for the screen, so what I was saying might not keep up exactly. We offer free training to show you how to use Apogee 127. We have one of our trainers, Evangelist Greg Rillis, who does a great job. I love watching his work, good stuff. And we're going to be doing these almost every week. So they're going to be coming to a city near you, and we're also going to be recording and putting it on Apogee Academy, so you can consume it via e-learning as well.
And that's not just a 30-minute demo. It's at least 4 hours of working through building.
Yes,
that.
4 to 6 hours, right? So it's a full workshop. You can come in person. It's free. If I didn't mention that it's free. Both online and in person. A few different resources here, and these will be available in the SlideShare. Most of the stuff is hosted on GitHub. We also have a Google group that you can sign up for announcements. So if we make changes, or to share those. Then we have Apogee Community, community.apogee.com, which has forums where you can ask questions, where we're answering those as well. I was just going through that fast so that we can now try to answer all of the.
All right, there have been a lot of questions, so we'll try to get them here. So, if validations are only done in Swagger YAML and not in the Node.js code, does that mean you're pushing Apogee 127 along with the API to the deployment target?
Yes. So when you, so if I understand the question correctly, in the YAML you're specifying stuff, and when you run your API using Apogee 127, we're using the spec to validate that.
Right. So
that's part of the. That is specifically the Swagger Tools library, built by Jeremy Whitlock. Very cool stuff that does that component.
Yeah, Apogee 127 is the framework which lets you do all this cool stuff.
Yes, so you don't have to write any code to consume that or to do that. All you have to do is write your controller code.
Let's see. Someone else asked, is there any way in 127 to render the Swagger docs that are visible in the editor to other developers working on the client side? We don't have access necessarily to change the APIs via the editor.
Yes. Let me show a couple things real quick. We are currently working on a way to share that in a place where you can host it. In the meantime, if you have it on GitHub, what you can do is go to editor.here, and then you can do, I think, import URL equals HTTP something, and have that be the path to your YAML file, and then that can be imported. We're also working on, when you deploy your API somewhere, that we have optionally /API docs, which is the Swagger way of hosting the JSON and the other stuff for your documentation, so you can see both the spec and the documentation if you want. So we want to package it up so the API includes the Swagger, the logic, and the documentation.
So similarly, along those lines, if the developer updates the Node.js files to add paths, for those automatically updated back in the YAML?
Not right now. So the paths can have, as you know, multiple different variations, right? So if you have pets / pet ID / visit / visit ID / diagnosis, how are you going to represent that in a path, and how would we be able to update that in the YAML to know that pet ID and visit ID and other stuff actually goes in the right places? So that's something that we do here, and we're going to work to see what we can do with that. But right now we don't.
It's also really one of the principles around 127 is that you should be spec driven. Right?
Yes.
You should be able to be very declarative about what your API, the structure of your API is going to be, which has the added benefit of in many ways it's like being a documentation driven design.
Yes.
You're in there writing the API, the structure of it, and seeing the docs on the right, and that saves a lot of pain later too.
Yeah, and it's kind of so if you're just writing your code for yourself to use to do something, then it doesn't matter necessarily what it looks like. It only matters when somebody else has to inherit the code or start to use the API that you've built in the code. Mm-hmm. And if you want people to consume your API and make it easy to use your API, which is a big differentiator for smaller companies, you need to put the thought up front into how you're going to build your API so that you can expose it in a logical manner that enables people to consume it.
I think we covered this one a bit, but if you could show again, how do I configure if an endpoint requires OAuth authentication?
Absolutely. So, start this again. So in this case, I have the OAuth resource configured here. And it's saying that I want to validate to consume OAuth from Apigee remotely. You can specify the valid grant types, and you can also have a password check function. If you're familiar with OAuth, there's different token paths for authorizing, issuing tokens, and validating the tokens, and getting a refresh token. So let's take a look at what it looks like to actually apply that policy to an endpoint. So we have weather underscore secure that has this policy applied to it. In this case, I'm just taking the defaults. We do also support the ability to do, I don't know if this is the right syntax, the scopes that are required and the different things that are required so that you can secure your endpoint with OAuth. But right now, just to accept the defaults, you have this bracket is an empty object, meaning that you're taking the default stuff from up top. So that's how you would apply the authorization to your endpoint.
Someone else said the great demos. It's being recorded. It's a great time to say again, yes, we are recording this. It will be published in the next week or so.
Yes, and we're also going to be updating a lot of videos on YouTube for how to do different things, like specifically, how do I add OAuth to my endpoint? How do I add a scope? How do I do these things?
We won't have time to cover the sort of technical questions, people who are running into install issues. But like Jeff said, community.apigee.com is a great place to ask those questions. These have all been solved. We've done a bunch of workshops and seen basically all the kinds of problems that happen.
Yes.
We'll help you through it.
To Apigee async, yes. So one of the things that I didn't...
So the whole question here is, can analytics data from the remote services be fed back to Apigee asynchronously?
Yes, it can. So what I was trying to show with the... that's why. Here, the stuff for analytics is done in an asynchronous fashion. So I started it with the analytics debug flag. It didn't come across because there was a typo. So as I'm pushing the results in, it does it in an asynchronous fashion. And so it's not demoing because I think I changed something, but let me show you kind of how it works. There's 3 different configuration elements that we have. There's the buffer size, it's the number of records you'll keep in memory. Then we have the flush interval. So how often will we flush records? In this case, it's every 2 seconds. And the batch size is the number of records that we will flush per flush, right? So in this case, every 2 seconds, 100 records will be pushed to Apigee. So we'll probably do a little bit more configuration here, different options, where you have like a high water mark where once you get to that point, you start flushing until the low water mark. But right now, these are the options that we give you, and this is done in an asynchronous fashion. There is no synchronous thing here.
Another question, do you need an Apigee subscription to use the OAuth functionality?
No, you do not. Everything we've shown here is available for free.
That being said, if you're going to run a production app, usually you want to be able to at least have some sort of service level agreement around that. If you're already an Apigee customer, that comes with it.
Yeah.
Let's see. So we're starting to get toward the end here of our time. I think we have just a few minutes left. So one question came in: does Apigee have only a cloud version, or can it be hosted as an on-prem solution as well? Absolutely, on-prem is fine. Everything we do.
Yes.
Is that a fair statement? I think it is. Everything we do in the cloud is also available on-prem. So absolutely, yes, you can.
And with 127, you can run 127 in your data center and have it communicate with Apigee Edge, also in your data center.
Not a question, but a statement. It's great to see the Apigee extensions configured in the same YAML file. I agree.
Yes.
It is great. You're totally right.
Yes, it's very cool.
There's more good stuff to come around that still, too. That's a teaser, right? Teaser.
Yes.
We're not stopped. This is the beginning of the 127 story and Node, which has been, I think we first launched support for Node in Apigee, a year ago
yes.
or so? And so, I think this just reflects that Node has become more and more important in how we think about creating custom policies, custom logic in the API layer.
So one thing quick time check. I think we're getting to the end of the hour. I would talk about this for another 5 hours and show you lots of different things.
Yeah, I had to hold myself back talking about Swagger because really I could talk about Swagger.
So one thing I do want to share before we go. I said I would show you something cool with UserGrid and how you can use it with 127, but I didn't. So I'm doing it now. So what I did was a 127 UserGrid download, and that downloaded UserGrid to my local machine. I could do a 127 UserGrid start.
And this gives you an entire BAS.
Yes, an entire BAS written in Java using Cassandra on your laptop.
That's kind of awesome.
It is pretty cool. Not only is it the BAS that has our API, the REST API on top of it that you can use, I can also now type A127 UserGrid portal. We give you a portal as well, which has a very nice interface for managing UserGrid on your laptop. And this is the same, this is the Apache version of the BAS that we have, and this is the UserGrid branded version, the Apache branded version of our backend as a service console as well, which is pretty cool.
Someone else asks, is there an easy path for product managers to be able to edit YAML and create API first top-down experience without coding skills? That's a great question, and
yes,
right to our sweet spot. Yes, it is.
Yes.
What's the longer version?
That's the longer version is, yes, it's specifically designed for product managers who can design an API that says these are the paths, you want to document it, you want to present it, then give it to the development team who can then implement the controllers to have the business logic. And you don't have to add the Apogee extensions for caching and the other stuff. You can leave that up to the development team, or the apps team can go and add the annotations to cache the things that they want to do to secure the endpoints that they want secured. So it's specifically focused to enable that type of workflow.
We didn't show it. We need a longer. We need more than an hour. But there's also the built-in mocks, which you talked about,
yes,
but we didn't get to show. And that's a really great tool when you're designing APIs, so
yes,
that you can describe these services, and all of a sudden, boom, you've got a sample.
So we're going to have a lot more videos on our, I'll leave you with one thing, and then we'll have to close it out. We'll try to answer...
I'm sorry we weren't able to catch all the questions. They actually came fast and furious.
Yes. Developers.apogee.com. I'll leave you with this here. There's Apogee 127 for building APIs in Node.js and Swagger,
great,
which is our thing here. We have a video that kind of goes over this stuff that we did in this webcast, and we'll also be putting more content here with stuff like how to use mock mode, how do you do these different things. So, yeah.
Well, thank you all for attending. I hope you had as much fun as we did.
Yes.
Please give Apogee 127 a try if you are interested in API spec-driven API development. Thanks, and look for the video coming soon to a YouTube channel near you, specifically Apogee YouTube.